When the lawyer read the will, the words didn't sound real. I'd sat in that office before, back when Dad was still alive, his hat on the table, his boots tapping the floor as he joked about, "When I kick the bucket." But that day, the air was heavy and still, like the moment before a storm. Everything, land, equipment, livestock, and financial holdings, goes to Mrs. Evelyn Carter, the lawyer said, eyes flicking nervously toward me. My stepmother sat there in her black dress, face calm, hands folded neatly in her lap. Not a tear, not even a twitch. I waited for my name. It never came. When it was over, I stood outside on the dusty main street, the ranch truck parked where Dad used to leave it after town runs. The keys were still in my pocket, though technically they weren't mine anymore. The wind carried the smell of rain and hay, and for a moment, I almost expected him to walk out of the hardware store like nothing had changed. Evelyn came out a few minutes later, her perfume sharp even in the open air. "He wanted stability," she said quietly. "You're still young. You'll find your own path." I wanted to ask if she'd rehearsed that line. Instead, I just nodded and watched her drive away in Dad's truck, the one we'd rebuilt together the summer I turned 16. That night, I packed my things into the back of my old pickup, a few shirts, boots, and the letter Dad had left me, handwritten, folded twice. I hadn't opened it yet. Couldn't. The ranch lights flickered behind me as I drove away. Somewhere past the fence line, coyotes called into the dark, and I wondered which of us they were mourning. I didn't open Dad's letter until the next morning. I'd spent the night in an old motel off Highway 17, the kind where the paint peeled off the doors and the coffee tasted like rust. The sunrise pushed through the thin curtains, painting the room gold. I sat on the edge of the bed, unfolded the envelope, and tried not to breathe too hard. His handwriting was shaky but clear. "Son," it began, "if you're reading this, then I couldn't fix what needed fixing. I hope someday you'll understand why." I read the lines twice, trying to find between them a reason, something that would make sense of giving everything to Evelyn. He wrote about the ranch struggling, about debts and droughts, about how Evelyn had helped him keep things running when no one else would. Then came the part that stopped me cold. "You'll get your chance when the time's right, but you'll have to leave first to find it." Leave first. That was all he said. No instructions, no map. Just that one phrase, sitting there like a dare. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my jacket pocket. Outside, the air smelled of wet dirt and diesel. Trucks passed on the highway, kicking up dust that shimmered in the light. I started my pickup and drove without thinking, heading back toward the hills, toward the only home I'd ever known, even if it wasn't mine anymore. When I reached the old fence line, I stopped. The ranch looked smaller from the outside. Evelyn's car was gone. The horses stood near the trough, heads down. And then I saw it, a stranger's car parked by the main house, sleek, black, and too clean for ranch dust. I didn't know it yet, but that car was about to change everything. I parked at the edge of the property and watched the stranger step out of his car. He wore city clothes, pressed jeans, a white shirt that had probably never seen a day of real work, and boots too shiny for mud. For a second, I thought maybe he'd taken a wrong turn. Then he looked straight at me, smiled, and said, "You must be Luke. I'm Carter, your cousin." I hadn't seen him since we were kids. He'd grown up in Dallas, far from cattle, dust, and early mornings. The last I'd heard, he'd made a fortune in construction or investments, something with money and suits. He walked up with the confidence of someone used to owning things. "Didn't expect to find you here," he said. "Heard about the will. Tough break." "Yeah," I replied. "Guess the ranch has a new queen now." He laughed lightly. "Well, don't get too comfortable being bitter. I came because I heard some of that land's for sale. Figured I'd take a look." That hit me hard. Evelyn selling the ranch? So soon? "She's already got buyers sniffing around," he added. "Said she might let me make the first offer, family discount and all." I clenched my jaw. That land isn't hers to trade like a used car. Carter shrugged. Legally, it is. But maybe we can figure something out. You and me. I've got the cash. You've got the history. Together, we might stand a chance. I didn't trust him yet, but there was something steady in his tone. Not pity, not arrogance, just interest. For the first time since the funeral, I felt a small spark of hope, faint but real. Still, I knew better than to think any rich man showed up at a ranch for sentiment alone. Carter spent the night at the ranch house, though Evelyn didn't seem too happy about it. I watched from the bunkhouse porch as they talked near the corral, their voices sharp and quick, like two traders at an auction. When he finally came back across the yard, the sun was low, painting everything in that orange light that makes even old fences look golden. She wants way more than it's worth, he said, kicking at the dirt. Figures she can squeeze money out of nostalgia. Sounds like her, I muttered. He looked at me with that same calm smile. I could buy it outright. But that wouldn't fix what's broken here. She doesn't just want money, she wants control. And you're the one thing she can't control. I frowned. I don't even have a claim. Maybe not on paper, he said. But you've got roots here. That matters more than you think. Tell me something. What would you do if this place were yours again? I didn't answer right away. My eyes drifted across the field, the barn standing like a tired old soldier, the pasture stretching toward the hills. I'd bring it back, I said finally. Not for her, not for me, for him. Carter nodded slowly, then pulled a folded document from his jacket. Then let's start there. I'll make her an offer she can't refuse. But if we're going to save this place, I need you beside me. The paper he handed me wasn't a contract. It was a plan. Investment figures, restoration notes, even new irrigation ideas. It was everything Dad had wanted, but never had the money for. I looked at Carter differently then. Maybe he wasn't here just to buy something. Maybe he'd come to rebuild it. The next morning, Evelyn called a meeting. That's what she called it. Like we were in an office, not standing in a dusty ranch kitchen with the smell of coffee and horse feed mixing in the air. She sat at the head of the table, perfect as always, her lipstick too red for mourning. Carter and I stood across from her, side by side. I've considered your proposal, she began, tapping her nails on the table. It's generous, Carter, but this ranch isn't just property to be flipped. It's sentimental. Her tone made the word sound like a weapon. Carter smiled politely. Then maybe you'll appreciate that I want to keep it in the family. She raised an eyebrow. And what role does he play in all this? She nodded toward me. I opened my mouth, but Carter spoke first. He's the one who knows this land. Without him, the place isn't worth half as much. I'd like him to manage operations. Evelyn leaned back, eyes narrowing. Manage? You mean live here again? Carter's smile didn't waver. That's right. I think Luke deserves that. The silence that followed felt like a held breath. Then Evelyn stood and walked to the window, looking out over the pasture. I'll agree on one condition, she said finally. If you want this ranch, you'll need to prove it can still produce. 1 month. No hired hands, no shortcuts. If the land turns a profit, I'll sell at your price. If not, this ends. Carter looked at me, then nodded. You've got yourself a deal. As she left the room, I felt my stomach twist. 1 month to resurrect a dying ranch. Carter turned to me and grinned. Well, cousin, looks like we've got ourselves a challenge. We started the next morning before sunrise. The air was sharp and smelled of dew and diesel. The fields hadn't been plowed in months, the fences leaned like tired bones, and half the troughs were dry. I stood at the edge of the pasture, wondering where in the world to even begin. Carter came out of the house carrying 2 mugs of coffee, sleeves rolled up like he meant business. You ever realize how bad things look after you promise to fix them? He said with a grin. Every day of my life, I answered. We spent hours clearing debris from the irrigation lines, patching fences, and coaxing the old tractor back to life. Carter wasn't useless. He worked harder than I expected, though his hands blistered quick. He laughed about it, said, "City hands weren't built for this kind of redemption." By noon, the sun was high and merciless. The smell of hot metal and dirt hung thick. I wiped my forehead and looked toward the barn. Evelyn stood in the doorway, watching us with her arms crossed, expression unreadable. When she noticed me looking, she turned and walked away. That night, we sat on the porch with beers in hand, the crickets loud and steady. Carter pulled out his notebook, filled with scribbled numbers and sketches. "If we get the east field watered by next week, we can seed before the rain. I'll handle the grain supplier." I studied him for a moment, surprised by his focus. "You really think we can pull this off?" He looked out at the dark horizon. "Your dad built this place with less than what we have now. Yeah, I think we can." And for the first time since the funeral, I believed him. 3 days into the work, I found myself in the old barn, sorting through tools that hadn't been touched since Dad's last summer. The air was thick with dust and memory. I swear it still smelled like him. Tobacco, leather, and sweat. I wiped my hands on my jeans and opened a crate near the back wall. Inside were ledgers, photos, and a small wooden box sealed with a rusty latch. When I pried it open, I found something that didn't belong. Receipts, letters, and a single photograph of Dad and Evelyn standing beside Carter at some county fair years ago. They looked like family, laughing. I frowned. I didn't remember that day, or Carter being around much then. That night I asked him about it over dinner. "You were close with Dad?" He hesitated before answering. "Not close, exactly. He helped me once, after my old man lost everything. Your dad gave me a summer job here. It's where I learned what work meant." I studied his face, trying to read what he wasn't saying. "So that's why you came back?" He looked down at his beer, turning the bottle in his hand. "Partly, but there's more to it." I waited. He didn't elaborate. Later, as I walked back to the bunkhouse, I saw Evelyn's light still on. She was sitting by the window, phone to her ear, whispering fast. When she noticed me outside, she snapped the curtain shut. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was moving beneath the surface, that the will, the land, even Carter's arrival weren't just coincidences. And in that quiet stretch of Texas night, with the wind rattling the barn roof, I could almost hear Dad's voice again. "Son, the truth's never buried deep. It's just waiting for the right hand to dig." By the end of the first week, the ranch started to breathe again. The fences stood straight, the soil had been turned, and the east field shimmered with promise. Still, something felt off, like we were pushing against more than just hard earth. Carter had grown quieter. He spent long hours on the phone, pacing by the truck, his voice low and clipped. When I asked about it, he waved it off. "Investors," he said. "They want updates." But I didn't buy it. One afternoon, I caught him talking to Evelyn by the corral. Their body language told a story that words didn't. She smiled too easily. He looked guilty when he saw me. They broke apart like kids caught sneaking cookies. That night, I confronted him. "What's going on with you two?" He sighed. "She called me first, before I came here. Said the ranch was bleeding money and she needed someone to buy her out quietly before the bank got involved. I was supposed to make it look like a family favor." "So this whole deal was a setup?" I snapped. "Not anymore," he said. "It started that way, but after seeing what this place means to you, to him, I couldn't go through with it. I wanted to believe him, but trust doesn't grow back easy once it's been burned." He rubbed his temples. "Look, Evelyn's hiding something bigger. The debts aren't real, or at least not all of them. Someone's been draining accounts for years." The words hit me like a punch. "You're saying she's been stealing?" Carter met my eyes. "I'm saying your dad knew. and he tried to fix it before he died. The night went still. Even the crickets stopped. Suddenly, the 1-month challenge felt like more than just proving the ranch could stand. It was about finding the truth buried under its soil. I barely slept that night. Carter's words churned in my head until sunrise painted the ranch in pale gold. I walked straight to the barn, drawn by a pull I couldn't explain. The wooden box I'd found earlier was still there on the shelf where I'd left it. Inside, beneath the photograph, I noticed a false bottom, a thin panel loose enough to pry open with a screwdriver. Underneath was an old leather ledger, the pages yellowed but neatly written in Dad's handwriting. At first glance, it looked like a record of feed and supply costs, but halfway through, the numbers didn't make sense, withdrawals that didn't match deposits, payments to names I didn't recognize. One entry caught my eye, dated just weeks before his death. Transfer requested by EC, unauthorized, confronted her. She denied. Must protect the land if I go. EC. Evelyn Carter, my stepmother. My throat tightened as I flipped to the final page. Scrawled in thick, uneven ink were the words, "If this ends with me, the truth belongs to Luke. He'll know where to look." The ink bled in places, as if written with shaking hands. I carried the ledger to the porch where Carter was drinking coffee, his eyes heavy with guilt and exhaustion. When I tossed it onto the table, the sound made him flinch. "Was this part of your plan too?" I asked. He shook his head slowly. "No. But it explains why she was so desperate to sell. She's hiding the theft before someone audits the books." My voice was low. "Then we need proof." He nodded, tapping the ledger. "There's more of this. Somewhere. Your dad wouldn't have written this down without a backup." And just like that, the search for a crop turned into a hunt for the truth. By the next day, Carter and I had turned half the house upside down. We searched the study, the pantry, even the crawl space beneath the stairs. Nothing. Evelyn kept to herself, pretending not to notice, though I caught her eyes on us more than once, sharp and calculating. Around sunset, I walked into Dad's old office, the one room she rarely entered. Dust lay thick over everything, except for the area around his desk. The rug was slightly off-center. I knelt, pulled it back, and there it was, a square metal panel flush with the floorboards. I called Carter. Together, we pried it open. Inside was a small safe, the kind Dad used to keep papers in back when he ran cattle contracts. The keyhole was rusted, but when I reached into my pocket, I felt something cold. The key from Dad's letter. It fit perfectly. The door creaked open, revealing 2 stacks of documents, an envelope, and an old flash drive taped to the top. The papers were financial statements, each one stamped and dated, showing transfers made by Evelyn to shell companies over the past 3 years. There was enough there to bury her. The envelope was addressed to me. Inside, a short note. "If you find this, don't fight for revenge. Fight for what's right. The land is yours when you can forgive what hurt it." Carter exhaled slowly. He knew everything. Before I could answer, the floorboard near the door creaked. Evelyn stood there, her expression unreadable. "So," she said, voice steady, "you finally found it." She stepped into the light, her gaze shifting from the ledger to the papers. "Be careful what you think you've uncovered, Luke. Not every truth sets you free." Her tone sent a chill through me. Evelyn closed the office door behind her and leaned against it, arms folded, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. "You think you're clever?" she said softly. "Digging through graves that should have stayed closed?" Carter stepped forward, his voice calm but tight. "It's over, Evelyn. We have proof of every transfer. You drained your husband's accounts." She smiled, a small, cold curve of her lips. "Do you really think anyone will believe the word of 2 desperate men trying to claim land they lost? The law's already on my side." I held up one of the stamped statements. This says otherwise. Her eyes flicked to it, but she didn't flinch. Those papers can disappear as easily as they were found. And if you go public, I'll say you forged them. You've got a history, Luke. Bar fights, debt, a reputation for anger. Who do you think they'll believe? Her words hit hard because they weren't lies. I had made mistakes after Dad died. Nights at the bar, trouble in town. She was counting on that. Then Carter spoke, his tone turning sharper. Maybe you're right. But there's something you forgot. We have the flash drive. Every transaction, every password. Digital trails don't burn as easily as paper. Evelyn's face stiffened. For the first time, her confidence wavered. You don't know what you're getting into, she said. That money wasn't all mine. There are people who don't like their names written down. She backed toward the door, her voice low. Walk away while you still can. We didn't. When she left, the house felt colder. Carter turned to me, jaw set. If she's telling the truth about others being involved, we've just kicked a hornet's nest. I nodded slowly. Then let's find out who's been buzzing. We spent the night at the kitchen table, the flash drive plugged into Carter's laptop. Lines of numbers and names filled the screen, accounts, wire transfers, offshore companies. And among them, one stood out, Harland & Co. I recognized it immediately. It was the same company that had been trying to buy up land all across the county for years. She wasn't stealing for herself, Carter murmured. She was working for them. It made sense now. The sudden push to sell the ranch, the convenient debts, the pressure from investors. Evelyn wasn't just greedy, she was a middleman. I felt something burning in my chest, not anger this time, but clarity. Dad found out. That's why he changed the will. That's why he gave it all to her, to watch her hang herself with it. Carter looked at me. You sure about exposing this? If Harlan's involved, they won't just send lawyers. I don't care, I said. He built this place with his hands. I won't let them tear it apart. By morning, we had copies of everything, both printed and stored online. Carter contacted a reporter he trusted from Dallas, someone who'd been investigating land fraud. She agreed to meet us that afternoon at the diner in town. Before we left, I walked through the house one last time. The walls felt alive, like the ranch itself was listening. On Dad's desk, I left the note he'd written. The land is yours when you can forgive what hurt it. I didn't know if I was ready for forgiveness, but I understood now what he meant. Protecting the land wasn't about ownership. It was about truth. As we drove toward town, dust rising behind us, I looked out over the fields and whispered, We're almost there, Dad. 2 weeks later, the story broke across the state. Ranch fraud scheme exposed, the headlines read. Evelyn's name appeared in every paper, tied to Harland & Co., and a list of shady land deals that reached far beyond our county. Investigations opened. Accounts were frozen. By the time the dust settled, she was gone, fled before the sheriff even arrived. Carter stayed a few extra days, helping me get things in order. Reporters came by the ranch, snapping photos, asking questions I didn't care to answer. When they left, it was quiet again, real quiet, the kind that lets you hear the heartbeat of the land. One evening, Carter stood by his car, suitcase in hand. You'll manage from here, he said. Your dad would be proud. I nodded. Couldn't have done it without you. He smiled faintly. You'd have found the truth either way. You just needed someone to hold the flashlight. As his car disappeared down the road, the sunset spread across the fields like fire on gold. The ranch still bore its scars, broken fences, rusted tools, but it was alive again. The soil felt steady beneath my boots. I walked to the porch, the boards creaking the way they always had. The rocking chair swayed slightly, moved by the wind. I sat down, closing my eyes, breathing in the smell of hay, earth, and something faintly sweet, like the peaches Grandma used to can. The horizon glowed soft and endless. The ranch was mine again, not by inheritance, but by fight, by faith, and by forgiveness. I looked into the camera, speaking from the porch like I was talking straight to Dad, and to anyone listening now. Thanks for hearing our story. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.